Hi guys, in this tutorial I want to go over the basics of Unreal Engine's landscape tools, and I'll go through every tool in depth. We'll talk about some of the differences between world composition and traditional landscape setup, and I'll demonstrate a couple of edge cases and some things that I've learned working on this side project with terrain. One thing that I'm not going to cover in this tutorials, well, in this particular tutorial, is materials. I'm currently using Infinite Affordable Landscapes pack for my materials, so that's the one I'm using. I am learning this guy's setup as I am using his materials, and hopefully one day I'll understand how exactly he set them up, because these are pretty complex shaders. And you'll see if I sculpt on them, they have a slope detection, so they sculpt, you get the little rocks and the mountain separation based on the slope you're sculpting. So I might cover some of the techniques that this guy is using in some other tutorials, but in here, just basic Unreal Sculpting Terrain 101. So if you create a new world and you have some lights, so you can actually see things, let's go into the Landscapes tab. In here you can see there's Manage, Sculpt, and Paint. Manage is generally, you can use it to delete chunks of your terrain. You can also create new landscapes here this way. And if you don't have any terrain in your level, you probably just go to the kind of this default create new terrain mode. Where is it? Manage. There. So with this, you can either just create a flat new piece of terrain, and for the sake of tutorial, I'm just going to crank up my lighting so you can actually see better. Starlight. Oh. And I apply the material that I use for the rest of for these guys, but you can see it's black. You create a new geometry and apply the material. A lot of times you just get this black shader on it, and the reason is it doesn't have layer info assigned to it. And now with layer info assigned, the terrain actually knows where to apply what kind of material. So now if I sculpt, you can see it works. So this is with this sculpt tab enabled, you can see I can pick between different landscapes that I have in the file in the scene. We have all the sculpting tools. We have the different ways you can apply the strokes, and different follow-up modes. So for the most part, I'm going to be covering the tools and the alphas, but let's just quickly go through the follow-ups. Basically, they're used to create a slightly different effect. I barely use them because I like to sculpt with alphas, but they're there. So now, Sculpt Tool is your very basic tool. You have the tool strength, which is maxes out at 1. There's a target value, and then there's a brush size. One thing that's really important is that you'll see that the brush size maxes out at 8K, but it doesn't mean that this is the biggest you can make your brush. If you click on it and crank up, let's say, to 20K, you actually can sculpt with a large 20K brush. it's so big that you can't really see you can sort of see, I hope. So the reason they limit it out is for performance sake, but it's important to know that if you need to sculpt large terrain, you can just you can crank it up and gently tap on it to do something like this. Now there's a use clay brush, I think by default is off. I don't know why I had mine on. You can see I just quickly tap and I sculpted some terrain. Now you can increase and decrease your brush size with bracket keys, same as Photoshop, and you can also switch between different tools like this with more than, less than signs on the keyboard. They're the ones kind of close to the right Alt key and the spacebar on the keyboard. So you can see I can sculpt a piece of terrain, then quickly switch to smooth and smooth part out, some of it out. And that's how I work for the most part, where I just kind of quickly build something up and then switch to smooth and then make it a little bit more walkable. And you can see I can actually walk on this slope. There is also a detail smooth that I'll cover in a bit. Flatten is great when you wanna obviously flatten. What's so great about it is it's got this pick value. Where is it? It's got flatten target. So what this does is you can actually pick height, and then it will. Oh, wait a second. Get rid of this. Pick the height, and now I can flatten the entire thing and create this plateau. So that's pretty cool. And the slope flatten, as you've seen a second ago, it was applying it on an angle, which I don't particularly want in this case. So that's great. Ramp is a fantastic tool. What it lets you do, you can create slopes, and that's an amazing tool when you want to create a walkable pathway through mountains or wherever. The way it works is like you drag the thing, and then you can kind of click on these endpoints and relocate it to create the path, and then you press enter and it applies it. With this, really important cool thing is the fall off. So you can actually, let's say, do something. Let's make it smaller. So really intense fall off, and then apply it. And if you look at it, it kind of like has more of a subtle curvature to it. And right now I'm just using this piece as an example, but I'll actually go in and create a giant chunk of a terrain over here in a sec, and we'll cover all sorts of edge case scenarios, so don't worry if something is not clear. Erosion is great for adding kind of like the noisy details, but I barely use them because I like to use alphas for sculpting. Hydro erosion, similar thing. Noise adds noise. Retopologize does the it basically retopologizes. I don't use it often, but sometimes when you have like a very stretched piece of geometry, it's handy to use this brush to advanced to eliminate some of the artifacts. So if we look at the mesh edges, it modifies the topology, at least it's supposed to. I think it's this okay, because I have displacement on, it's kind of hard to see, but yeah, it is hard to see. You'll just have to trust me on that. So visibility, this is a really handy brush when you are creating a cave or you need some kind of a hole, and that's how you'd paint a hole in the surface. And for it to work, you have to set it up in a shader. You can see my shader is compiling, but you should see a hole here in a sec. Yeah, as you can see, I painted a hole. Now if I shift paint, I can get rid of it. So for this, I'll just quickly show you where this is set up. It's really easy to set up. If I click on this guy and go to the material, it's actually going to be in the parent. All you need to do is you right click and do visibility mask, and you create this node and you wire it in to opacity mask, and that's it. This will allow you to use that visibility painting. Okay, so this is cool. Now, what else do we have here? Selection lets you kind of mask stuff and sculpt with masking. Mirror, exactly what it sounds. You can mirror a piece of a landscape. You can also rotate the plane, I believe. Mirror point. Yep, so I guess it rotates like just on an axis basis. And then there's also copy paste. Copy paste is an amazing tool, and I'll show it to you in depth just in a sec. But what it lets you do is you create this box that you can scale and move around. You can Control C to copy, and then you can move this thing over, rotate, Control V. And probably not the greatest example, let's move it closer. And whenever you Control V, you can see it conforms this the plane to whatever is in the gizmo. So I'll crank up the brush size and get rid of the follow, so it's a little bit more intense, and you can see it's 1:1 now. So this tool is like, I use it a lot to kind of grab chunks of the landscape and just based on those shapes and that design, duplicate over to create kind of more random thing without having to go back to World Machine or whatever to generate a new height map. Alright, so their gizmo. These are the sculpting tools. What else do we have here? So let's go back to our sculpt brush, and what I like to do is I brought in a bunch of JPEGs, like literally JPEGs with rocky textures like this, and I use them to sculpt this noisy terrain like that, and then just switch back to a smooth brush and also have an alpha on it. And with smooth, I can selectively sculpt, like selectively smooth just some of the details. So there's still a little bit of roughness like this, but then there's a softer gradual slopes. And here I smoothed it out a little bit too much, so I'm just gonna press less than sign to switch back to sculpt, less than, and add a little bit of that noise, and then switch back to sculpt, and then maybe smooth just some of it. So detail smooth, what it does is it smoothes just like a small detail. So if I really rub it in, it smoothes just a little bit of it. Okay, so you can see with just like a basic alpha, I can create something that looks pretty okay for just a hand sculpted geometry, and I can run around it and it feels good. But you can see there's a little bit of stretching, so I like to, you know, go over it and with detail smoothing on, kind of smooth out some of these extensive faceting in the topology. It also depends on the brush you're using. So you can grab something that has less noise and it will be a little bit better. So that's the alpha. There's also a pattern option, and pattern, I don't use this, but what it lets you do is have a texture with multiple channels, and you can pack different texture into each channel, which I really never had a use for. I feel like it's a little bit on overkill, but depends on the project. Component is handy if you want to displace or smooth a large chunk. Actually, I lie. I think component is only available for Sculpt. So what you can do is just click, click, click to raise or lower a certain part. It's pretty handy in a lot of cases. Looks like it maxes out at 10. But you can see I can just quickly raise a chunk and then switch to smooth and smooth out the transition. And let's get rid of detail smoothing. So could be handy for creating mountains and such, where you need to uniformly raise a chunk of terrain. Another thing with this is you can adjust the scale of the brush. So I can literally raise like just a small chunk like this, and then switch to smooth, and you can see you have a mountain thingy. So these are the tools that I use the most in terms of sculpting. We also, of course, have painting tools, but and they are, for the most part, are the same. I'm not going to be painting anything. This video just covering the sculpting aspect. So let's get rid of this terrain and let's look at what we have here. And before I get into it, let's get rid of the edges, meshed edges. Okay, so there's a traditional kind of approach of going to manage, and then add a new landscape and doing it this way, or you can import it via height map. I will cover the height map generation through World Machine or ZBrush in the next video. In here, I'm just gonna load one of the existing ones, so you can see I just loaded the height map. And if you press fit to data, it will generally match the height map and do a pretty good job of it. Another thing is when you are creating it, you can modify the height, and this is something that I was very kind of scared of doing, and because I was thinking of it as some kind of a science, but really you can just go in and adjust the Z scale to your liking. When I do a video on World Machine, there's a little bit of math involved to kind of match it with the World Machine height, but if you have a flat terrain and you like it to be more spiky, or vice versa, this is the best place to do it. Generally, you don't want to scale the landscape after the fact, especially with world composition. It's kind of impossible. So if I do something like this and I press import, we should have something really extreme. Ooh, that's cool. Yeah. Well, the problem is because I cranked it up so high, my terrain is now really displaced and really low. And because I have world composition enabled, I can't really move this guy around. So now let's talk about world composition. So it's a thing that they added more recently to Unreal, and what it allows you to do is, first of all, you'll see that there's this cool little interface that lets you move things around. Alright, so I added this map. I added this map to a persistent map, so I kind of screwed up my entire world composition. So let's do it properly. So the way world composition works is that your persistent level is empty, and then whenever you enable it in world settings over here, it scans for map files, and each of these terrains is in its own separate map file. And what happens is that if you go to world composition, you can move the entire land around, and it will move all the assets that are within that map file and that are attached to that terrain. So if you place some bushes or you put a castle on this terrain, you can move the entire freaking thing around. And that's really cool. And another thing is you can have different layers, and different layers can have different streaming distances. So if I create a new layer, you can see the streaming distance is 50,000, and you can kind of customize how close the certain parts of the landscape need to be to start streaming in. And if you don't know what streaming is, basically to optimize the performance, we want to be able to hide parts of the map when we don't see them, right? And traditionally, Unreal would have a streaming volume, level streaming volume. And the way it would work is you place a little box, and what it would do is whenever you enter the box, it would load a level. And it's all great and awesome back when games were more linear, but because there's no way I would miss this box if I'm like walking through it. But now that the games are like, there's a lot more open world games, it's kind of becoming harder to place. Like I would have to like place like an array of these boxes all over around this level just to make sure that the player doesn't miss them, and like the chunk loads, and then there's all sorts of like it's a lot more tedious to do for open worlds. So what the Epic is doing is they have this distance-based streaming, which allows you to like if I'm close enough to see this thing, it will load. If I'm not, it will unload. So that's one of the biggest benefits of world composition. And another thing is it allows you to have more. If you work with a large team, it allows for a better separation, because everyone can have their own little map file to work on. And additionally, last but not least, they also the world composition supports what is it called? What do they call it? Tiled landscape. And tiled landscape is basically same landscape like this guy, but you can export it out of a world machine as like 6 different, or what is it? Actually, like it can go up to like as many as you want, basically. A bunch of different pieces that, when combined, can create one landscape. And this is cool because it's cool and it's kind of because you can stream even more, because like if I'm standing on this side of the mountain, we can set it up so that the other side is invisible and you're more efficient on memory. But at the same time, in here you can see I have only 4 maps that combine this whole thing. And if I create a tiled landscape, and let's select. I'm not gonna actually create it because it's gonna take some time, and I don't have time. It will basically create a map for each one of these, and that's a lot of maps. So it can become a little bit tedious to go through each one of them, or like trying to find what you're looking for if you're a little bit. Yeah, it can get tedious, but there are walkarounds to it, and when I do a tutorial on World Machine, we kind of will look closer into it. Anyway, so without getting too much into detail, let's actually have some fun. So what I want to do is I will create an adjacent landscape in here, and I'll show you how it works. So these two, I believe, let me look at it. So with world composition, Unreal now lets you to create adjacent landscape, and what it does is it basically adds a new map that is being treated as a part of the main landscape. So if you look at these two, they're seamless. There's a seam in between, but it's perfect, and if I run around, it's basically I can't tell where it lays. But now if you look here, these two are clearly not seamless, and the way I'm blending them together is by creating overlap and like sculpting them to kind of mash them together, and that's kind of more classic approach before the world composition. And you can still definitely do that, but it's a little bit more work. And in here, I believe, I don't know, is this? Yeah, this one is adjacent as well. So let's go ahead and create an adjacent landscape. And when I found out that there's such thing as an adjacent landscape, I was really excited about it until I tried it, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I go here and pick my, which one is this? Is it this one? This guy, and I'll do add adjacent landscape, and I will do X minus, which will create it on the left side. And let's save it into map. I have map 2, I don't have map 3, so let's call it map 3. And just wait. So you can see it created the landscape. It kind of placed it randomly, but we know that it should be here. And first of all, well, it's reflective because there's no paint information on this piece. Like I said, can be easily fixed by just going into paint and then fill in this layer, and now it's great. But hey, it's floating above the ground, and first when I saw it, I was like, holy shit, how do I fix this? And if I grab a smooth brush and I try to smooth it, do I have detail smoothing? I think another part of the problem is, wait, let me see. There we go. Something was funky with my orientation. It actually did put it on the right side. I kind of expected it to be on the left, but anyway. So if I start smoothing it, you can see it connects it to my original landscape, which is awesome. The problem is, well, crap, how do I lower it down? And the reason this thing is happening is because both of these landscapes are actually at 0 in terms of vertical, like the Z height, but this terrain is actually has the height map that pushes it down, while this is flat, so it's kind of like on a ground 0 level. Now, when I first tried to fix this problem, I tried a few different things. Like, you could try like maybe a component brush and then increase the brush size and kind of like just like push it down. The problem with this, it's going to be really freaking slow, and it's hard to get a perfect result. You can also, you know, try flatten, but flatten, like, it can be hard because of if the terrain is too massive, the performance is the problem, right? So if I crank it up to 20K and I pick it around here, actually, yeah, it's not too bad. The terrain that I had previously had a lot more components, so it was a lot slower. So this is not bad, but what I love to use for this is our trusty copy paste tool. So what this does, where is it? Copy paste? Yeah. So what I can do, because Unreal treats this as a part of this landscape, you can copy height information from here and paste it over here. I tried doing it across different landscapes and I failed, so it didn't seem to work. I need to do a little bit more tests on that, but it definitely does work on adjacent landscapes. So just make my box nice and big, Control C, and I'm gonna give it a little bit of a brush fall off to smooth it out somewhat. Move it over and rotate it a bit. Control V. So this way I can quickly create just randomly generated terrain really fast, without having to, you know, go back to World Machine and like to create new height map or hand sculpt it, which would be tedious and wouldn't give me as good of a result. And the coolest part about this is if you are into, like, you're sculpting like spiky mountains and you want to extend the set, you're gonna use the same design language. Here I hand sculpted it, and you can kind of, it's not super obvious, but it is obvious that this is not this. And also I have this kind of like the blend in between that I didn't want, whatever. So, oh crap, I accidentally pressed Control C, so I don't want that. Let's copy this part. Move it over. And we're good. Now, if I look at it, it's pretty hard to tell that it's been copy-pasted, and you can also, you know, go and sculpt some additional changes. Now, you'll notice that it didn't affect my border edges. and you can really easily fix it with, let's see if Flatten works. Typically I would just do a ramp, just drag it like this, get rid of the fall off, press enter, bam, fixed. You can also, you should be able to use Flatten, so if I pick this height, and there we go. Very nice and quick, and then just smooth out the leftovers. And if I press play, pretty cool. Now, what else? So, copy paste tool is fantastic. We created an adjacent landscape. Obviously, there's a little bit of sculpting that might be required, and whenever I smoothish things like that, always have an alpha on. This way, I don't lose details, and it actually gives me an additional, more like organic noise. I barely ever use like a standard sculpting brush without an alpha because it's just too artificial looking. And you can see you can like just tap to smooth it out, or like press and hold to really create a nice slope. So that's it in a nutshell. One quick thing maybe to cover is if I were to create just a new landscape that is not adjacent. Let's just do very basic. We wanted 2 sections, fairly small, and then we'll decrease the resolution. Yeah, let's say create a, let's do 12 by 12. And what I can do is use this landscape to create a little bit of a more interesting overlap of this snowy area into the green land. And I can just place it like this. We can make it even, let's do 8 by 8. And it's fairly low res, and which material do I want? You know what, I'll just create it and then apply whatever material I need. Okay, so clicking on it and then going back into paint. Okay, so this is a proper material. Add, bam. So in this case, you'll see that we have a lot of like there's some floating geometry, and you can clearly see that it's floating. So the workflow that I use for this is basically Sculpt Tool. Let's see if Flatten can. No. So I believe the problem here is when you sculpt, as you can see here, I can push the geometry in, but there's kind of like a level 0 where you can't displace your geometry anymore, which might not be the case with this component brush. But I have encountered this before where if I try to push it down, I can't. I'll see if I can replicate it here. Yeah, like so here you can see I'm pushing it, but I can't push it any further. So that's something to be aware of. I don't have a solution for it yet, but if I do, I'll definitely keep you updated. So you can switch between landscapes either using this drop down here, or in this thingy. I wish there was a shortcut, but if there is, I don't really know one. I hope there's one. Maybe one day I'll discover it. So we can do the same thing, just kind of push it down, and as you can see, it's like instead of just one straight line, we're kind of creating a more interesting overlap. And now what I can do, once the border is fixed, is go to the sculpt, decrease my tool strength, and this is a very extreme example. Like the project that I'm having fun with is kind of allows for this kind of a mishmash, kit bashed terrains. Like I don't think real world works like this, where you have snow and then you have a green land, but it serves a good example. You can clearly see which landscape is what. And once again, same approach, just switching between smooth and sculpt, making sure it's got nice alphas and oh, that's flatten. Sure. Smoothing it out. And you can see here I also have a decal that I can use to kind of blend things more better together. Let's see. Which one is this? This guy? So basically it's just the texture with the material, but I can kind of project it. It's a little bit expensive, but it works nice for areas like this where you can move it around and blend things a little bit better. The contrast is a little bit off, it's darker than this material, but it's work in progress. Alright guys, I hope you found this useful. I'll try to keep pumping these out. It's just the last few weeks were really busy and stressful for me. But yeah, if you have any requests regarding Unreal tutorials or World Machine or ZBrush or 3D Code, feel free to send me a note or to chat to me in Discord. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Cheers.